Well, I think we'll start. And good morning, everybody. I think there are people on their way, doubtless sat on the Brussels metro, enjoying the experience on their way over to here. So welcome to the Sense4us workshop this morning. We're going to be talking about policy making in a complex world. That's what it says on the brochure. And before we start, I'll firstly introduce myself. For those who don't know me, I'm Paul Walland. I am the coordinator of the Sense4us project. I work at the IT Innovation Centre, which is part of the University of Southampton in the UK. And this project, it's been running for about 3 years, and during the day, you're going to have the opportunity to see some of the work that has been done in the project, talk to the people that have been doing that work, and discuss with them what the work they've done can lead to and where it's going. During the day today, the discussion is really going to be about technology, applying technology to policy-making process, to the basically the management of our world, if you like, the policy, the way that democracy has been developing, and particularly we've seen the way that social media has been increasingly used, perhaps changing the way that democracy itself works, and perhaps in the future the way that democracy itself is going to work. And okay, some of that is going to be desirable, some of that is going to have some pitfalls, it's going to have some challenges for us, and I hope that today we're going to be talking around what those challenges and what those pitfalls actually are. Recently we've seen the results of what you might call popular discontent with the status quo, and it's almost like a sort of undermining of what we think of as the traditional democratic process. But arguably, if you look the other way, then the opportunity for people to be able to exchange ideas across social media between each other has really played its part in expressing a popular viewpoint. But there are issues around that. And to what extent does the kind of social media discussion actually reflect a true representation of the popular view? Is it the Twitterati, if you like, the people who are competent with social media who are now dominating that stage? So again, this is something that we need to be talking about today, and talking about the way that trust in the democratic process is being challenged, not necessarily undermined, but being challenged. And what role does technology play? What role will technology play in the future in developing, supporting, or maybe challenging the trust in those who represent us democratically? So the Sense4us project itself has been looking at the technology that underlines democratic engagement or potential democratic engagement in the future. We've looked at, if you like, the gap that exists between the way that Parliament and the policy-making process operates, the speed at which it works, but the whole data flood that it's got to be able to try and cope with, and that sort of pace of digital change and the amount of digital information that's there. We've got a kind of two-speed highway, haven't we, where we've got the policymakers in the slow lane and we've got everybody else using digital technology to kind of roar past them in the fast lane. How do we get those speeds more similar? And can we use tools, the kind of tools that are coming out from Sense4us, to help the policy makers themselves see beyond their traditional place, the traditional people that they work with, and engage more with the people who are outside their normal sphere? Can they identify those people? Can they engage with them? A lot of people are disengaged from that process. Can the technology help those people to become engaged with the process, and can we use them? So during the day today, we're going to be looking at and discussing all of these issues on the various panels that we've got. And in a minute, I'm going to hand over to the first panel to do that. There's a couple of housekeeping points and points of interest before I do that. There's the normal one about the fire exit. Should the fire alarm go off, you go that way. I think you just follow everybody else through there. Normally there's that thing that says please turn off your mobiles. However, we are using Slido as one method for putting questions to the panel. The Slido #Sense4us, I think it's in the packs. If you sli.do will find you Slido, and then log in using the #Sense4us tag, and you can post questions which will be picked up. So actually you do need to leave your phones or mobile devices turned on, but can you turn off the ringing function on that? And also there is the Wi-Fi here, which is under Inspired Meetings, but I'm told that the first character is an I, not an L, so it's a capital I think that's right, when you do that. Okay, so yeah, it's time to hand over, and on our first panel I'm going to hand over to Vasilis Koulolias, who is the director of the eGovLab in Stockholm, at Stockholm University, and I think, Vasilis, you're going to introduce your panel and introduce us to the first session.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's the first panel discussion is about trust. So what really matters? Building trust in the policy-making process. Well, we're living in times where trust is actually a very big question in everybody's mind. I mean, if you think about it, many people feel totally disengaged with our governments. Often in referendums where it's one way to build trust, the no become yes, and it's in the times. But there are many other things that are taking place. So in this particular panel, we will have Dr. Ruth Fox, which is the director of Hansard Society, and she has written a number of publications, and she also works with charity, and her main role is to strengthen the parliamentary democracy in the UK Parliament and elsewhere. So, Ruth, if you would like to join us here in the standing panel. Let's see. So, Andrea Halmos works with the European Commission at DG Connect, and she has been dealing for many years in the area of actually building trust in government and also the democracy field at a certain point. Michael Psallidas, he's the co-founder and managing director of Crowdpolicy. And he also has developed a number of very interesting tools for transparency and citizen engagement in Greece. And then Professor Maria Wimmer, she's a professor at the University of Koblenz, and she's been working in the area of also citizen participation, democracy, e-government, trust for many years. So, trust in government, what does this really mean? I mean, only 40% of the citizens, in one of the latest polls that was taken and the study of OECD, trust their own government. A lack of trust compromises the willingness of citizens and business to respond to public policies and contribute to a sustainable economic recovery. And in these times, trust can be one of the key factors of engaging citizens back into the governmental process. It is key. It is key for the success of a wide range of public policies that depend on behavioral responsiveness of the public, necessary to increase the confidence of investors and consumers. It is essential for key economic activities, and of course, finance is one of the key activities, which is very pertinent nowadays. And trust in institutions is important for the success of many government policies, programs, and regulations that depend on the cooperation and compliance of the citizens. The challenge is we have an ever-evolving constituency nowadays. For example, in Stockholm, there are approximately 192 nationalities that live in there, and this keeps changing with all of the new movements and the drop down of many of the borders that now, in current politics, all of these are starting to be lifted up again with what has been going on. And I will not refer to any countries or names. Another thing is that children are now on the internet. In Sweden, for example, 72% of 2 years old are already on the net. And these are the future citizens. Do we need to start thinking about building trust with even the young children as they're growing up? And how do we do it? In the meantime, all of the relationships are changing between the citizen, the politician, and the public worker that actually consists for this trust building. And, you know, everything that can be digitized, now it's in the national policies of many of the countries, is being digitized. From the Internet of Things, cloud services, social media, government as a platform, big data, smartphones, smart algorithms, virtual and augmented reality, fast access to both fixed and online. All of this is changing the landscape as we're speaking. And now citizens, they just demand a lot of their services to be ready and accessible anywhere they are. Whether there are sensors that are monitoring the quality of the water, which again it involves the government, whether the parents are receiving updates from their school while they're sunbathing in the park. If their parking is running out, they want to extend it, they can order dinner, the trash bin that is out there may notify that I'm full, I need to be changed. And then a lamp may be broken that will be sent a report that also needs to be changed. All of this is information that the government needs to deal with in one way or another, or maybe not. Because on another hand, there are new trust relationships that are being built, and a lot of them might be from citizen to citizen. Blockchain is one example. It's questionable. So let's find out, is trust really the problem? Can new technology cultivate it? What do citizens want from policy decision-making process? What do elected representatives and government and parliamentary staff want out of that as well? Are new technologies altering, reinforcing, or undermining traditional political models, patterns of behavior and decision-making processes? Is technology really democratic? Why hasn't it delivered more democratic decision-making? Ruth, you want to take this on, and you have
5 minutes. 2 minutes.
Yeah, no more than 10 minutes.
2 minutes. Right. Well, I mean, my work largely focuses on parliaments as opposed to governments. So I kind of operate much more at the kind of the political level in terms of decision making, as opposed to the administrative civil service and the institutions per se, other than the parliament. And from my perspective, in terms of the political end of this debate, the issue of trust is difficult. My view is, frankly, as far as the politicians are concerned, what's trust got to do with it? I think when you focus on trust, you're focusing on the wrong thing, because whenever there's a political crisis, whenever there's a major issue kicks off, the political response on the media is always, oh, we've got to do X, Y, and Z in order to restore trust in politicians, restore trust in politics. And at that point, I ask the question, how can you restore what you have never really had? Because politicians have never been really highly respected. There may have been more deference to them in the 1940s and 1950s, but certainly there was never great respect, certainly not in the UK, and I think that's true also of more widely of Europe and the US. So, for example, in the UK, you can go back to 1834 and the Houses of Parliament burning down, this huge conflagration in the 19th century. And what are the British public doing? They are not pouring water on the burning flames. They're stood at the opposite side of the Thames River, cheering and jeering that this house of the political class is burning down. Similarly, you see those sort of the respect, the lack of respect, all of that reflected in the British media, for example. So my question is always, for the political class, if what they want to do is to restore trust, they are seeking the Holy Grail and they're setting themselves a level, a goal that is frankly unachievable. Why? Because the nature, the culture and the practice of politics doesn't lend itself to trust in the ways that it does with other professions or other roles. So, for example, the version I always use is, imagine you going to the doctors and you've got a serious illness. And you see your doctor and he says, oh, this is terrible, you've got to have an operation, you've got to sort this out. I can do it, and in a few weeks' time, all will be fine. As you leave the door of the doctor's surgery, there are 3 other doctors from different hospitals standing there telling you that the doctor you've just seen is a liar, is incompetent, hasn't got the right answers at all, that their decision is completely flawed, and you should follow them instead and go to their surgery and you'll get a better deal. Because that essentially, that sort of, the articulation of conflict and of different interests in politics is essentially how politics, certainly in the UK, plays out. And that is not a culture in which it's easy to build trust through that kind of conflicting debate and discourse, which is different to how things operate in professions like the health service or education. So in a way, the fact that, in Ipsos Mori's veracity index, politicians come bottom of the league table in terms of trust and respect is unsurprising. I mean, below bankers, below estate agents, below journalists, because the way in which they have to do their job, their work, the way in which the debate plays out doesn't lend itself to building those kind of trusted relationships. Now, where you go from there, I always say that there's kind of a 5-point plan I would like the politicians to focus on. Rather than saying it's about trust and building trust, better to focus on what I say, raising their game, thinking about that term raise, R-A-I-S-E. So it's really more about relevance, it's about accountability, it's about influence, it's about satisfaction, and it's about efficacy. And you focus on measures to address those 5 factors, and you have a far better chance of building not trust necessarily, but confidence and a higher degree of satisfaction and faith in the political system, which we currently lack, certainly in the UK, and it's reflected in a lot of surveys across Europe, including Eurobarometer. Focus on those things, and I think you have a much, much better chance of improving the state of politics. Focus on trust, and I think you lose your way, because you end up on focusing on the wrong things and always setting yourself a goal that's unachievable. Now, what role can technology play? If it can address some of those issues around accountability, around influence, about engaging citizens, as you talked about, more in the political process, then it can certainly help. It cannot be the total solution, but if it can contribute to addressing those factors, those 5 factors, then I think you can start to improve the nature of the political debate, you can start to improve political engagement. And certainly if you compare politics today with, say, 40, 50 years ago, today just 1/3 of the British public have confidence, have a sense of satisfaction with our system of government. It was much, much higher in the 1950s and 60s. And one of the differential factors is that people felt in the 1950s and 60s that they were much more likely to be able to exercise influence in the political system themselves. I think one of the interesting questions about this broader trust debate, if you think about, why do we trust Airbnb, the ratings on Airbnb, millions of people giving anonymous ratings, and we trust that, we have confidence in that to make decisions about how much money we're going to spend a night in Brussels. And yet, we don't trust our politicians, who live more closely entwined in our lives at the local level than ever they did. Why do we trust that and not trust the politicians? And I think partly it is an issue possibly around volume. The volume of ratings, if you like, on Airbnb is what drives it. There isn't a volume of support for politicians because of the state of political parties. In the 1950s and 60s, millions of people in the UK belonged to a political party. Now it's 1%. It's been going up a little bit in the last few years, but it's broadly about 1%. And I think that's part of the problem, that there is a missing link here, and technology can play a part in that in terms of how political parties can engage much more with technology and can become more technologically able in terms of how they campaign and particularly how they communicate with the public to try and change that culture and practice of politics.
Thank you. Ruth, what trust got to do with it? Build confidence to the political system. Andrea.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm from the Commission, from the unit that's responsible for eGovernment and trust. And I was asked not to bring a presentation, which is quite unique for the Commission. But what I thought to start with is just a small anecdote. The last couple of weeks, I've had on two occasions present something on eGovernment, and I was told, look, how could it ever be something acceptable, since there is really a lack of trust towards European institutions, towards government. So first you need to restore it and then come back with your ambitious action plan. And that, of course, is something that has been on our minds for a long time. And although coming from the government unit, which was predominantly concerned about how to make public services more efficient, more effective with the use of ICT, we've come to the recognition that digital tools can do a lot more for government. So what we've been seeing is a huge transition of the role governments or the role what digital tools have been playing in the public service delivery, moving from that just efficiency and effectiveness idea towards a much broader scope, towards a much broader role what digital tools could play with in delivering services, in creating policy decisions. And we're seeing that digital government strategies are actually great contributors towards good governance, towards open policy making, towards open government and greater transparency. And this has been kind of a driving force, moving away from eGovernment towards a digital government policy, which is what led us to also get engaged in this idea of how digital tools can help in policy making, how governments can actually get closer to citizens. And so those of you who have been following what we've been doing, perhaps you remember in 2009, ministers responsible for eGovernment have put this vision forward that by 2015 they would like governments in Europe to be recognized for being open, flexible and collaborative. This is 2009. And back then, of course, the tools were very different, and we have set out an eGovernment action plan for the period of 2011 and 15. And indeed, we have recognized that there is a lot to be done in bringing, in using digital tools for governments to bring citizens closer to their decision making. So we funded a number of projects in the area of e-participation, trying to use these digital tools mostly at local level to get engage people in their local decision making. We have also looked at how digital tools can help in understanding the availability of data. But I think what we've seen is that an enormous evolution of digital tools have completely changed the landscape. And now, with the new eGovernment action plan, we're seeing that there's a lot more opportunities to be done. So we have a whole set of initiatives around the idea, and two basic ideas here are very important: openness and the value of data. So we've been in 2013, we published a vision paper for the future of public services. And in that, we've already identified that this transition towards open government is going to change and completely transform the way governments are. And we're seeing that happen all over the EU and also across the world. Opening up data was really driven by a request from citizens in the context of Access to Information Acts and greater transparency, has been an evolution that really changed the way how governments have considered their data, of course non-confidential data, and we've seen a huge opening up of this data, and that triggered a lot of, with the help of ICT tools, that triggered the creation of a lot of applications that worked on transparency. And this is what we've also seen. We have a number of projects running under Horizon 2020 that take advantage of this data, creating visualization tools to better understand public spending, like DigiWist and Your Data Stories or Open Data EU projects. These are looking at, for example, data from procurement, for construction works, to allow citizens to use quick visualization tools to better understand how public money is spent. And this we've been seeing, and I think with the evolution of tools, we're seeing that it's more and more helping this openness and the availability of data to get people engaged once they're able to understand the data. What we're also seeing, however, is that the evolution and the opening up of, or the availability of even bigger data is going to even further revolutionize this. So going away from apps that were mostly looking at maybe services at a local level, we are moving towards an era where the kind of services and information we have will be real time. So with the availability of sensors and data that's coming in real time, the applications or the kind of services and information for policymaking will be much more dynamic. And so we'll be looking at this, how exactly this availability of open and big data will be able to help policymakers both in their policymaking processes to identify tools and methods to simulate data, to better understand the impact, to better follow their implementation, but also how this information can help citizens to have much better, much more personalized services at their hands. So it all sounds really, really nice, and we understand that there is this evolution of technology that enables this. However, we know that technology alone cannot do this and cannot restore trust in itself. We've seen, as you have also mentioned, the social networks have gained some kind of a confidence in society because of their mass engagement, and yet we are not even confident that information that's delivered there is really trustable and reliable, and we've seen that. And I think the recent results of different referenda also question the idea of how exactly we can trust that the discussion on a mass level will really bring the public value that governments would want. And for sure, we need to ensure that people have a say in what happens in their lives, but we also need to make sure that that remains in a way within that public value that government is concerned with. And so for this, I think a few ideas I would just like to bring into the discussion for the panel on what needs to be done. I think we need to make sure that this engagement through social media and the availability of participation tools is really recognizable. We see that mostly at local level, but what, at least on when you get engaged with the governments, for the social media discussions, it is not true that people are not concerned about what happens to them. We see that discussions happen on social media, discussions happen in specific discussion groups. What is really key is that governments need to be able to somehow bring that discussion into the real structured discussion on policy making. Otherwise, the discussions will go on, and governments already start feeling that they're no longer relevant to people because they're not picking up on these discussions. So what I think is fundamental, and we've been trying to set this out through our projects, to make sure that when different digital tools are created for different steps in the policy making, it's not only about the tools, it's about getting them into the actual policy making process from government. to better understand how I'm going to take into account the different discussions. There's a huge emphasis on deliberation, on playing different ideas or discussing different ideas at different steps, checking what the sentiments are around different ideas. But governments must have this policy-making process with the engagement of citizens built into their policy process. The second one is, of course, about the tools, which we believe that algorithm will be able to tell us what will be the right decision. I think we need to understand that digital tools are one step to go through the huge amounts of data and make sense of it, but it will not make the human decisions. We will always need to have the people who will actually see what fits the current context, what fits the current environment, and these will be tools that help decision makers, not necessarily evidence-based decisions, but evidence-informed decisions. I think that's the right word. What is also key is that digital tools will not restore trust in themselves, of course, and digital tools will not be the only means to engage with citizens. And I think this is key, and we've seen this in many of the e-participation projects, that when you only rely on the digital tools for engaging with citizens, it's not necessarily neither inclusive nor effective. This has to be combined with offline, with in-person uses. And what we're also seeing in the world, of course, is a greater way towards globalization, but also a lot more community and physical closeness that is going to take on a greater role. And we believe that this should, in particular in policy making, this should still be an alternative channel. And lastly, but not least, is the idea of skills that I think is very important. So you said, okay, many of the youngsters will be always connected, and this is how they grow up. But it's not all evident. It's not every corner of society that is fortunate enough to have that ability. And also public administrations themselves don't necessarily have the right ICT skills to be able to handle this. And a recent OECD report, for example, says that 44% of civil servants don't have the right skills to deal with e-procurement. E-procurement is becoming the main channel, the first option, and because of the procurement directive, it will be the obligatory means. And if civil servants don't have the right skills to do it, how exactly are we going to do it? In the recent eGovernment action plan, we've put forward a number of principles. One of the principles is digital by default. Clearly, it doesn't say that digital is the only means, but it will be the first option. How do we do this if not everybody has the right skills to do it? Are we not excluding people from the policy-making process if we're only relying on this? So we believe a lot in that in order for everybody to be able to feel part of this digital transition, we need to make sure that the right skills are there. And so the recent Digital Skills and Job Coalition that just launched last week, we hope that this is going to bring a big difference. So these are just a few thoughts from myself, and happy to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. So national digitization and the policies, transparency and openness, inclusive policy making, and education and skills is one way to start building integrity and towards trust towards the government. Michael.
Yes. Good morning. I will begin with three keywords.
Microphone.
Sorry. Yes. I will begin with
stand up if you
yes. With three keywords. Ruth said about volume, why Airbnb or Booking or all these platforms are trusted, so they have volume. And Andrea told us about tools. So I will add the bottom-up procedure and the methodology we followed since 2010 when we designed and implemented several government and local projects for accountability, engagement of the citizens in the decision process and in the government. And these tools back in 2010 were a big reforms for the Greek status because, you know, it seemed to be the only way to fight corruption and the bad political system in all levels. So I think we realized that this trust, of course, could be driven by technology, but there are small steps you should make each time, building tools, building accountability, building engagement. And when the people and the citizens are participating and understand that their voice or their contribution, their feedback is heard or is taken into account, or at least it is public and the volume goes up, I think this step by step is built. I would like to mention in brief some of these tools we implemented. The first one was the Clarity program, the AVIA. I have all this link and I can send it to you later so to distribute to everybody. So Clarity was a government system that all public decisions and spending should be uploaded to this system in order to be able to be paid. So for the first time, all the government in the central and local level could have a view with data, with forms and all this, of the spending and the budget, and people and citizens could see and check and feedback about the decision in all the levels of the government. That system was forced back in 2010 with a law, and there was a massive use of it because it was everybody should upload the decision. So it has about now 5,000 public bodies and about 15 million of decisions uploaded. So today it is a standard to the Greek government, and many times, you know, have tried to modify the law for the AVIA and so on and so forth. And the opposition of all the citizens and everybody else is too big that nobody touches the AVIA these days. So that was a system that built trust in Greece for all the decisions, for all the spending and the procurement. And citizens, you know, that they are interested about government or the public spending, always are visiting and taking the decision and all this. The second one was for the law consultation. So its law, before it goes to the parliament, should become under digital consultation from an online system, so people could contribute with their views and their opinions and their options. The third one was a system for the recruitment of managers for the public sector. So there was an open procedure and people could upload the CVs, and there was an evaluation committee for each position, and of course the ministers could choose from a short list of 5. Sometimes work, sometimes not, but you know, it was a step for the trust of for the government. And since then there are several initiatives in a local level, like open budget or visualization of the public spending, coming with real data from the accounting systems to the front end, and people could feedback on this and could see with their mobile in their area or the spendings, and you know, and see in other areas or according to the type of the spending. And we have implemented for the Parliament Watch, so for the work of the Parliament and in Greece and in Cyprus. And again, people are engaged, and they are asking the members of the Parliament for their decision or for demands or something like this. The policy monitor for comparing policies of different parties, especially before elections. Also, we have implemented the government monitor so people could see how all the major projects are going on and implemented. And I have many on the catalog, but I don't want to take your time. I can send you all this and see. But you know, the conclusion is that you should take on board the citizens on all this, and you should take them on board by having the infrastructure to do this. And the infrastructure, of course, is the tools we all mentioned, and the bottom-up methodology, because that counts. And of course, when you start having big volumes and all these tools have an impact, this is a domino effect after. So this is our experience from Greece. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So, Michael, a bottom-up approach, build the infrastructure, get the tools out. Maria, good morning. Please.
Yeah, thank you. In your first questions, you stressed trust. So I'd like to first elaborate a bit. What do we understand by trust? We've been doing research recently in the past 3 years together with political science, psychology, communication studies, and built up a database of trust literature, and we then set up an ontology on what trust definitions exist, from which disciplines do they exist, what are the variables actually that might influence trust or shape up trust. We have found out there's a vast amount of literature from management science, psychology. There's also a lot of literature on, from information systems and IT on basically trusting either the government, social groups, the individual, trusting in the technology side, the tools, the system. And what we learned from that investigations is, and I think Ruth mentioned that also, trust is a very complex thing. And in this regard, I would say, I think you called it a mystic concept. And you say it's not the right question. I think it is the right question, but it is not the only question that we need to answer. So what we need to do is, if we want to speak about trust, we first need to define more clearly, well, do we talk about trust in an individual politician? Do we talk about trust in a political party? Do we talk about trust in our democratic system? Or do we talk about trust in a particular tool or the data that is being provided on that tool? So for example, when we take the policy-making area, eSense, and the number of projects that are running here, I think we need to look into, when we analyze data from the social media, from other databases, is the data that we are analyzing there reliable? Is it trustful? Does it have the right quality so that it helps us? And Andrea was mentioning that to do evidence-informed decision-making in the end. So I think besides that there is a lot of literature, we still fail to bring in the concept of trust in the proper way to understand the tools that we are developing. Are they really contributing to building trust, for example, in the democratic system or in the parliament, in the decisions, the policy decisions that are to be made? And what we investigated and learned from some surveys also, for example, we did an online survey with citizens in Bonn. They provide online discussion forum and participatory budgeting, is that the tools are nicely there. This is all well set up, but procedural fairness is an issue. This is a term that political psychology uses for describing that, and Andrea was mentioning that as well. On the one hand, you have the participation process, online and offline, the mixture is good, but how the results of the online participation are fed into the decision-making process in the city council, that these decisions are being taken up, this kind of transparency is lacking. So people are not, they don't have a clear understanding of the processes, of transparency of what happens with the decisions, etc. So we can take this example actually for many of our policy-making solutions that we are developing here. If we do not succeed in interlinking clearly and in bringing together the citizens with the elected representatives into a dialogue, if we don't succeed in making this a transparent process, in transparently showing how the results that citizens contribute feed into the decision-making process, then trust will not be re-established, and citizens will not participate in the future. This is one aspect I'd like to stress. So procedural fairness and transparency along the processes. Technology may be fine, but the voices need in the end to be fed into the final decision making. Another aspect that I'd like to stress is in that study in the city of Bonn, people said, okay, we discussed among ourselves. So the citizens discussed in the online portal or in the public hearing, but the representatives of the city council didn't take part. So it was an one-side engagement. We need to bring, however, together both sides. So citizens, at least in this study, said we want to get in dialogue with the politicians, with our elected representatives. So the online support should not only be there for letting people discuss, but it should be should become a dialogue between the people and the elected representatives. So also to establish more direct conversation and collaboration, because otherwise it's a one-sided effort. And we talked with some people in the office of the mayor, and they said, okay, the elected representatives said, well, we wanted the people to discuss alone. We didn't want to have bias in there. So there are different misconceptions we, I think, need to understand and investigate. And I think this is very relevant for all different kinds of engagements where we want to let people participate. It's also about using open data and using the data. It's not only that the citizens then should explore, it's a common effort that we need. And this way we need a paradigm shift, actually, by okay, we have a representative democracy, but if we want to become more open, more participatory, engaging, then we need to bring together the people. And this, I think, is something where we are still failing.
Thank you, Maria. So by gathering everyone's discussion, I mean, I have noted approximately 6 points that we need to look at to be able to gain trust into the political process. One of them is the openness of the government. So this way, all the data is open. Then another one is reliability. So so the governmental body is actually doing exactly what they said they would do. And there are some checks and balances with all of this. Another one that we heard now is responsiveness. So you cannot actually open up the debate and then step yourself out of it. Then inclusive governance, inclusive policy making. Then one of the things that we may not have discussed, but I think that is it's very pertinent, is some kind of a regulatory framework of this particular debate. Because, I mean, we need to be able to look, to also build trust. We need to know, and we need to have some kind of a privacy and security policy for a lot of our data. And of course, always it helps towards a better regulation of everything else. So, so while we were discussing, we had a few questions from the audience that I have been picking up over here. One of them is actually for Andrea, and I'll take my glasses off because I'm not the 2-year-old that has still a very good eyesight. So, must we try to raise the skills of the public, or should we aim to raise the level of technology to the skills of public, e.g. natural language processing?
I've just followed this launch of the Digital Skills and Jobs Coalition, and it was striking to hear that there are almost 1,800,000 jobs in Europe not filled because the skills are missing. That the figures are different, but many jobs that will be filled in future are not even being educated or taught in schools today. We don't even know many of the jobs. And so this trickles down to all parts of society, and I think what we need here is that to be prepared for this, from the skills point, from making sure that this digital transition, for example, from the point of view of public services, goes smoothly. We need to make sure that, and there's of course a whole sentiment and fear about what this could bring to individuals. Skills, we believe, is a very maybe effective way to address these anxieties, and try and originally worked with ICT companies, but now we're really looking at all of society, citizens and public civil servants on how to bring this skills agenda, not just necessarily ICT skills, but everything, understanding data and so on. So I think there is a lot of value in moving towards improving the skills. Now, of course, there will be different tools that may not even ask us to have necessarily the skills, because if we're thinking of principle that is embedded now in the eGovernment action plan, once only. It means that you would submit your basic data to government once, and when you need to do another service with another part of government, that data, with your consent, would then be moved from one administration to the other, so they could provide you the service more easily. Now, if you take it to the extreme, this could also mean that at one point some of the administrative services could be delivered to you automatically, and you may not even notice that there's a service delivered to you, you just get the benefit of it. And so when you, for example, register the birth of a child, you would immediately be eligible for getting the child allowance and so on. So yes, you could question whether then you would really need the digital skills to be able to, but I think in tomorrow's world, we do need to have it to be able to have an understanding of the world, understanding around us. But that needs also education to better understand what is reliable of information around us and so on. So there's a responsibility in policymakers to ensure that the skills are there. Thank you.
Maria, what are your thoughts on this?
I'd like actually to add to that, and starting with a trust definition of Maya Davis-Shorman from management literature. They define trust as the trustor trusting the trustee in the sense that the trustee may do actions that could be vulnerable to the trustor. So taking a risk that the other party might do something of harm to him. So in terms of positive thinking, the trust is actually, and taking the once only example here, that the citizen leaves it up to the government, that it distributes the data without having the possibility to control that, and without the risk actually, with the risk actually that there might be some misuse of that. Now, if we implement the once only principle in an effective way, I think we need to establish some mechanisms of control, at least of possibility of monitoring, so that the citizen can, well, establish some confidence at the beginning, okay, things are going wrong, and knowing that whenever I have some suspect, I can go to that system and can control. There's also public sector information rights and other rights that actually enable the citizen to ask, well, what have you done with my data? So I think in terms of skills then, we need to establish skills on different sides. On the side of the citizen to not only use the technology, but also to understand the way processes are carried out differently nowadays. And I think particularly in terms of dialogue, if we think of complex decision-making participation, people, in order to be able to say, this is what I want, they need also to be able to assess, well, what are the pros, the cons, what are the underlying evidence factors that should form my decision. So in this regards, we need to build trust also in the tools, in the algorithms that we want to build into there. On the other side, we also need to establish this competence at the side of the elected representatives and on the side of the government actors as well. Because also they need to prepare, well, the decisions, they need to provide the right information, they also need to establish the trust to the other side that the citizens is able and does not make an emotional decision, but an evidence-informed decision. So we need to establish skills on different sides.
Mm-hmm. Ruth, do you have any comments on this?
I was just thinking, I mean, in terms of the things like data and so on, we've just passed in the UK the Investigatory Powers Bill, which you may or may not think is a good thing, depending upon your perspective. It's been a hugely controversial piece of legislation. But going to that issue about what we trust the politicians to do, when we say we trust them, what is it that we're trusting them with? And just at a very procedural level in terms of that type of engagement, you know, a huge amount of consultation was done, a large amount of evidence was produced. You know, the reality is, going to your point, I think, which is really important about procedural fairness or procedural justice, when it gets to the political end of the process, it comes under huge time pressures. So decisions being taken very, very quickly. Can we really say that the evidence-based, the consultation material, all the ideas and the arguments were considered as effectively as possible? I mean, that's got to be a minimum requirement from the public if they're going to participate in a consultation. And I think that is questionable about whether it's possible to do it in the way we're doing it in parliaments at the moment and on the timeframes that the political class and the media are operating to. But it also opened up a really interesting question about skills because, and related, through our Sense4us project, doing our end user engagement work with some of our tools, with parliamentary staff in Westminster, realistically, how can they, in the time they're given, just a few weeks, really assess, analyse and determine policy in a matter of weeks? And this is where I think technology can help because arguably, and we would say in Sense4us we've got a tool that can help with this, it can help to analyse through algorithms and so on that material and can be a time-saving and labour-saving device. But the big issue about the skills of the staff in the parliaments, and one of the things that's come through our end-user engagement work in the parliaments is actually that there is a huge skills gap to deal with this kind of technology. And certainly in some of the sessions we've had, some of the senior staff have sat with sort of slightly embarrassed looks on their faces as they've realised some of the very manual practices that their staff at the bottom level on committees are doing to analyse this vast amount of material. And I think if the public knew how this was done, there would be questions about rigour, there would be questions about bias, there would be questions about efficacy, and the public probably wouldn't trust or have confidence and faith in the process.
Good point. Michael, do you have any comments on this? Or?
I think
Okay.
I'm covered, yes.
So we have also another question from the audience. And I will start with Ruth on this. Is there a one way of building trust in public sector, or is it in different country by country? If so, what would be an appropriate approach for on an EU level? And I thought Britain should start on this one.
I think that's what we'd call a hospital pass.
Yeah.
I think it is different in every country, pretty much. I mean, there'll be some common factors, but every country's political, parliamentary, governmental system has its own quirks and cultural emphasis which affect how things operate. And even the political system, you have procedures which are clear, visible, that you know about, but the reality is what happens behind the scenes, the politics behind the scenes, how it plays out culturally and practically and politically is very different. And it can be different from parliament to parliament, even within the same country. So Westminster operates in a very different way to the Scottish Parliament or the National Assembly for Wales in many respects. Yet at the front level, at the top level, it appears that some of their procedures are quite similar but they play out differently. So my sense would be that you're probably looking at a national level approach, but there will be some common factors.
Mm-hmm. Andrea?
Yeah, so definitely there's a big cultural difference in Europe towards trust in the system, towards trust in how your data is handled by public administrations. What we've tried to do is really set out in the current eGovernment action plan an overall principle that we believe would be a sensible and probably something to be shared among all EU member states, is the idea of openness and transparency, which we believe is a trigger towards greater trust. And in this sense, what we're really looking at, and have actually been measuring it over the past years in the government benchmarking as well, is about transparency about the decision-making process to better understand the different steps of the process, and transparency about what happens to your own data. I think that's something that people would want to know. And also about openness, so opening up the non-sensible data so that people understand what is the government spending, what is the different, all kinds of information. And then this can create, as we've also seen it in the OGP whole movement around it, this has triggered a greater, just opening up all kinds of data sets to be able to respond to this request from trust. What I wanted, I was just thinking, we are all different nationalities here, obviously, from different cultures, but if we were all put on a plane and given a pilot, we would all trust it in a way. So question is, why is that? And we would get on that plane and most likely think that, okay, we're going to arrive to the place. So what is that? Is that because there is an institution that, or some kind of a structure behind that's reliable? Is that because that's our only choice? Is that I think that's maybe an analogy to play with. And then just back to an earlier discussion you had, I think, Maria, you also mentioned on how to build some trust. We've been looking at a number of initiatives on what is it that's going to really make a difference. What we've seen is that, okay, at local level, there's a great possibilities, because that's when the representative democracy is most representative, because you may even know your local representative. And what we've seen is a number of initiatives that seemingly just perhaps create a quick collaboration with citizens, but then can trigger a complete culture change. For example, participatory budgeting is one of those, where you really have a concrete, very well-defined task, you have a concrete budget, and you get engaged. And then, of course, if you make the process open, that's the right way to do it. And to know, okay, these are the ideas that have come in, this is where we've invested, and so on. And the other area is, for example, the kind of things that the Fix My Street and similar services do, that you do have a problem, you notify someone, and that actually takes care of it, and you're notified when it's done. When you really have this dialogue with citizens and government, and you really see that you have made a difference, a change, that I think really creates a greater trust.
Fantastic.
I think one possible solution on this is to identify best practices from each country and try to make general methodologies and tools as an infrastructure in order these tools to be able to be implemented in each country according to the level of technology and to the behavior of the citizens and the culture in each country. But I think that some best practices should be identified in EU level and promoted and build open source tools available free to every government to build on this.
Thank you. There was a study about 2 years ago, actually, that a lot of the EU nations trusted more the European Union than they did their own country. I'd like to see that study now. So, Maria?
Yeah, I think most things have already been said. I just want to stress that the cultures in the countries are really essential also. I've been working with the Georgian government or ministries in ICT development in the last few years, and we talked a lot about how people could be moving into more e-participation, taking more actively part in that political dialogue. And people said, well, in our culture, it's the way that people discuss among themselves, but they don't trust the government, that the government would hear the citizens' voices. So even if the government would provide e-participation mechanisms, people wouldn't participate there because they would not trust that the contributions they do on that portals or on that public hearings would be really taken up by the government. So culture is an essential aspect we need to also understand in order to transition in the process of a participatory, engaging, open government.
We had, it's very interesting, about 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting, I'm also with the World Economic Forum, and in a committee that deals with trust and integrity in government. So we had a meeting in one of the Central American countries, I will not name it, and there were people from all over the world that are part of WEF, the private sector, public sector, civil society, everyone was there. And at one point the consensus was that if some of the politicians will not actually make money on the side, they, at least in their culture, they're totally stupid. So, so it is expected for them to also do something. Now, how do you deal with that kind of a cultural difference? But anyway, I have another question from the audience. Okay, several. And I will start, Maria, with you on this one. Citizen evidence informed decisions about complex issues implies time to comprehend the evidence and to discuss it from multiple perspectives. What is the role of technology on that?
Well, I think that the role of technology is in particular to help us manage the complexity, actually. Designing, shaping up a complex policy issue and helping us then step by step to understand what are the interrelationships, the influence factors, what are the options, using then, for example, simulation technologies. I think will help comprehend more easily at the side of the citizens what the factors are. And then if we have, for example, tools available that can help us, well, also in a nice way to play and test. If I use this factor, what is the consequence? If I set that parameter, what is the consequence? To quickly learn and comprehend, so the technology will actually hide the complexity of a policy field into the algorithms, into the visualizations, etc., while the interface to the citizens should be simple and supportive in a way that data can be analyzed very quickly. Visualizations help us comprehend easily and quickly, and well, playing also, having a fun factor in the serious discussions where we can play and test options.
Okay. From the parliamentary perspective, Ruth?
I mean, one of the things that parliaments really struggle with is government comes forward with a policy, a piece of legislation, they provide the evidence base. Very difficult for parliaments to test that themselves, for members of parliament to be able to effectively scrutinise it if they haven't got access to the underlying data themselves, which often they don't because government doesn't provide it, they just tell them what it says. But there's also then, so there's the analytical bit at the beginning as part of the scrutiny process, and then there's the end when you do post-legislative review, and I think that's one of the big weaknesses in parliaments at the moment. There isn't a cycle of learning about policy within legislatures, so because they're not able to do as much post-legislative review as really they ought to do, and to hold governments to feet to the fire about, you said with this policy X, Y and Z would happen, 5 years on. So in the UK, post-legislative review is supposed to happen every 3 to 5 years after royal assent is granted to the law, but we just don't get that much of it. Partly it's a product of time, and they haven't got the capacity to do that kind of work. But even when they do, a real problem about being able to go back to what was originally said, analyse it against what has happened, and figure out why that didn't occur as effectively as it might have done. In the UK, one good example of how that does happen is the Public Accounts Committee accounting for how public money has been spent after the fact. But that kind of model of foresight work looking forward and then review work looking backwards to create that cycle is really not there in most parliaments. And if technology can help that, that would be really useful.
Yeah, exactly. Would you like to comment on that?
Perhaps, so I think tools are very important, and from the point of view of the Commission, what we've been trying to do is bring out some really good use cases, good examples through the European funded projects, and those tools that have come out of those projects should then be reusable in other contexts, and I think this has been a really important progress over the past years to have those tools, for example, reproduced on JoinUp, which is a platform where some of those reusable tools can then be implemented in other contexts as well. So some of the tools have really helped, or can help, as you said, just digest the vast amount of information and quickly give the information to policymakers so they visualize it, they better understand what the impacts could be. Also help bring in the discussions from elsewhere so governments understand the sentiments around different topics, but also not just in policy making, but in the implementation, for example, phase. It can really help policymakers understand to what extent the policy has been effective. Is it being implemented because of all the sensors, because of all the data that's coming out from that end of the policy-making process, real implementation, will be able to better understand whether it's been effective and how to adjust this to be able to be more agile. And in this context, I just wanted to mention, many of you will probably have heard, in the context of the cloud infrastructure plans or European cloud infrastructure communication earlier this year, the Commission plans to connect European research data through a big European, let's say, grid or connected data centers. And actually, one of the use cases for these connected data centers, which will also have high-performance computing tools, one of the users is going to be the public sector in Europe. So we're really looking at some good infrastructure in the very near future for public administrations to take use of open so research data across Europe that will have some capacity to actually crunch that data. So these tools will be extremely useful then to be able to reuse on this large amount of data.
Thank you, Andrea. Michael?
I think that visualize with dashboards, sorry, forget it all the time, to visualize with dashboards the problem, the complex problem, to gamify, so make simple decisions and see the impact on gamification context, and of course to give incentives to participate on this. I mean incentives. Foursquare some years ago used to make you a mayor when you checked in a place, so that was a kind of incentive. So I think that the tools gamify incentives and visualize could help to provide a simpler interface for complex issues.
Thank you. I will step back and be a little bit of a traditionalist rather than in the technology era. Would anybody like to speak rather than sending me questions on the
We are at the millennial era.
Okay. Yes. The microphone to the gentleman right over there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the panel, for the interesting reflections you made. One question I have is you have spoken about highlighting keywords like transparency, openness, and that the engagement of citizens could be or should be used as input for policy making. So my question with regard to openness and also transparency is if you see many differences in topics, policy questions, when openness and also transparency should go first, but there are, of course, some really security issues or secure issues which are under a process, discussions between a lot of stakeholders. And of course, if stakeholders tap in very early with the openness, transparency in the process, they would lose their support. For example, if you think about some companies, lobby groups, all people or interest groups with some special interests inside of a process, how would you think could you integrate it in such a process? it is obvious that we have a lot of data available all over Europe. We have data portals and so on. You know about the information, but my interesting question would be how you see that. Is there a difference, or should we focus on different approaches inside of policy process in general?
Thank you. Who would like to tackle that? Maria.
I will try first, yeah. Thank you for a very interesting question, which I'm also thinking of a lot, because on one side we have to make decisions or make clear our minds about, well, who are the stakeholders in a certain policy area that we want to engage. I think we cannot always, or we should not always only speak of the citizen in general, because as you mentioned, the stakeholders. This comprises, of course, the citizen as well, but very often it is companies, it is activist groups also that should come in. And when we want to engage all of them, we need to understand at what stage we can bring in the different stakeholders. There is a vast amount of literature on stakeholder theory that can help us to understand, identify first, well, what is the role of the stakeholder? What concerns do they have? Are they affected, or can they affect the final decision? So based on this kind of understanding, then you can decide on, well, bring in this stakeholder at this side and the next stakeholder at another stage. And then come up with a comprehensive approach and plan, stakeholder engagement plan, when to bring in which stakeholder and for what purpose. Also making very clear, and coming back again to the procedural fairness or procedural justice aspect, to every stakeholder, it must at every time be clear, well, what can I contribute here? How is my contribution fed into the subsequent procedures? The first point that you mentioned, well, not every discussion can be done or should be done, will be done openly. We have also discussed with some people from the Rhineland-Palatinate Parliament about that. Sometimes, actually, the government does not want to be open at first hand because secrets need to be discussed internally also. So also this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And openness and this kind of development, making up minds, need to be coordinated.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes, about 8 more minutes. We have a plethora of questions online, but I would like to take one more from, not from the anonymous that
No.
I'm here.
My name is Elisa, and I work for the European Citizen Action Service. It's an NGO based in Brussels, and I work on digital democracy. So I just wanted to, I agree a lot with what was being said by Dr. Fox and Professor Wimmer, because I think that when we talk about trust, it's always a very, very vague concept, and it is not like possible to even give answer on such a vague concept, and it has to be a bit more precise. But I work on the EU level, and there was, before we were talking about why do people distrust, for example, the European Union. I think that maybe Dr. Wimmer can confirm this or not. A very general framework of trust is basically if the institution or the person, the politician, has 3 things. So the first one is competence, the second one is integrity, and no, the second one is benevolence, and the third one is integrity. So when people look at the EU, for example, they don't see the EU having competence. Look at our financial crisis, look at our migration crisis. So the perception is that the EU is not dealing with the situations in the right way, and they cannot solve the problem. The second one is benevolence, does the EU seem to be compassionate? I can tell you from my perspective that we have been fighting for the European Citizens Initiative as a tool for e-participation, and we have been being blocked by the Commission to improve this tool for citizens. So how can the people think that the EU is not just an economic project, but someone who takes care of the citizens, trying to listen to their voice? And the third one is integrity. When people see Barroso, for example, going to work for Sachs Sachs, do they think that the EU has integrity? So these three things basically say that if you want to be trusted, you just have to be trustworthy as well. And I think that our problem here is not technological. It's really about understanding how we can maybe improve our democracy, but with technology. But the basics here is that our democracy at the moment is under pressure, and also the trust is because is under pressure because also of the perception of how policy making is being done, and also I think technology has worsened our democracies in a certain sense, and we have to really look at how to institutionalize also a bit these e-participation mechanism, because I see that online everything is doing whatever they want. There's a lot of also chaos on how we should define these rules. And I just wanted in general if you agree that these are some problems or if there are some other things that I have missed out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisa. This is actually another full session. Very good comment. So, shall we discuss it? Would anyone? Andrea?
I won't take the responsibility for...
We may have a comment from the audience, which is Paco. Yes.
My name is Francisco Garcia Moran. I am Chief IT Advisor. And every time I'm amazed when we speak about the EU, something like that's an entity that decides everything over there. The EU is all of us. The EU is member states. And I just remind the legislation and the norms are approved by the representative of the citizens that are the parliament and the representative of the government that are the council. So the EU is not the commission at all. And you cannot say that because one specific person decided to take a direction that, by the way, looks legal, probably not moral, you can extend that to everybody. So you say that it's not benevolent, it's not integrity, because one of the members, even significant, is not following kind of moral rules, even though it's following legal rules. I wouldn't have done it. But I mean, all these are generalities. The question that I ask is, what are we doing for the EU? You look at what is happening in every country. It's against EU everything. So we are for a solidarity project, and we are not being solidar at all. And look at the immigration. It would take 10 immigrants per village in all the European Union to solve the problem. What are we doing? What every one of us is doing? Nothing. So it's not the EU, it's us. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, 2017 would also be our anniversary for the Maastricht Treaty, so we can reconsider a lot of things and actually review it to remember what it is all about. So, okay, one last comment, and then I have to make room for the next panel, and of course the coffee. Please. Oh, did you have a... Yes.
I don't want to repeat what has been just said, but if we start an analysis by saying the EU is incompetent, not benevolent, not integral, I think we're in the wrong part. I mean, I can say I worked in a national administration which was very competent, and I worked in a European administration, and I have to say about my colleagues, they were even more competent than people you find in national administrations. I think there are challenges. Not all the problems that are on the table here in Brussels have been solved until yesterday. There's still something to solve. There are things that we might not solve in the way that everybody wanted to be solved. Benevolent, I mean, if we start to put into doubt that a project that was started 50 years ago and has been awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace is trying to do something good for its citizen, I mean, then we're and the other thing, integer. I mean, with 40,000, 50,000 EU civil servants, you find several black sheep, and some you don't find. But I mean, please. I mean, if you want to start with the analysis with the assumption that it's as a whole, not integer. I mean, I just want to say it clearly. I don't. This is not something we can just.
Thank you.
I think she's speaking more about the perception.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah. It's exactly.
what they didn't understand, because I am someone who works also for Europe, and I believe in this, and I think that there are a lot of things we should improve. What I was saying is why there is no trust, because the citizens do not perceive the EU to be working in the right way, and trust is about perception. It's not only enough to do and be competent and show integrity. It's not enough to do, it's important to show. The communication here of the EU is also a problem. So it was simply that I was trying to say.
Yeah. Maybe we need a little bit more marketing. So, Maria, the last comment, and then we have to hand it over. We can all go and discuss it outside.
Yeah, I think what we learned from this kind of discussion here now is we cannot just generalize. We need really to go into the details if we want to analyze understanding of trust, and then we have to identify who are the trustees and what relationships do exist and what factors influence that trust. I mean, the three variables or factors that you mentioned are the ones that Maya Davis-Shorman have defined, for example, in their trust model, and there are many more of that, and also different understandings. But in the end, we cannot just generalize statements, but we need to go into the deeper analysis, because the concept of trust is complex. It's very mystic, so to say.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the panelists for a stimulating discussion this morning. Thank you. And are we ready for some more coffee? It should be right outside, and we will be back in about 15 minutes.